to Inside the Recording Studio. I am Jody Whitesides, and with me, as always, is Mr. Chris Hellstrom. How are you today, Chris?
I'm doing okay, Jody.
Just okay?
Doing okay.
Just okay?
Yeah, had some personal issues, car thingies going on, but I won't bore everything with that. But just, a little bit bummed out, but things will be okay.
Yes, I can understand. You told me the story. That's awful.
Yeah.
So today we are going to dive right into our subject, which is going to be the difference between the concept of mastering and or processing your mix on a tube bus. Right? Did I say that correctly? I feel like I didn't.
I think that was pretty good. Yeah. And this is a listener request.
It is.
Actually. So this comes from our listener, Justin Berner. Thank you for the suggestion, Justin. And I think it's a good one. We have touched on this a little bit in a prior episode in preparing your tracks for mastering. But I think it
warrants a deeper dive?
Something of that nature, yes.
Okay.
I think so. So
are you ready to dive?
I think we'll dive right in, shall we?
Go right
ahead. We got our scuba gear on. We're ready to go. I think the first thing that we should do is probably do a little bit of a explanation of the history of mastering, or what traditional all mastering was.
Okay.
Right, as opposed to what it kind of is today. So
It has changed, definitely.
Where today I think most people think about mastering as a primary issue of just loudness. Make my track loud. I want it loud.
I want to feel it in my chest. Thump me in the groin.
So, right. So it's not always the case that that's just what mastering is. Right now, we'll leave that alone. That's not just what it is. But there are other things that tend to happen and with mastering, and it could be slight. And this is still present today, but it could be slight fixes in EQ.
Yes.
Keyword there being slight. Right.
Slight.
We're not completely reshaping things, because then you probably have issues with your mix. But it's that, and also getting tracks to sound cohesive
from one to another,
right? So assuming that's the desired result, which in the case of an album, it tended to be, right? They should sound that they kind of belong together, right?
Sure.
It's not like, and you don't have to go and reach for the volume knob when the next track comes on, right? Or anything like that. Or one is really, really bass heavy and other one is top heavy. They're supposed to sound cohesive, like it's one big slab of work. Right?
Yes. So, and that, to kind of just say one big slab, because a lot of people now are releasing singles.
Sure.
So mastering for a particular single is not exactly the same as mastering for an entire album, as you say. So that's one area of distinction where the mastering process has actually changed a bit, because mastering for a single is maybe you're comparing the single to some other release that the artist has already done, or some other, or another single or another album of content that the artist wants their single to sound roughly similar to, in terms of the volume and everything else. So those are both very good things to say, yes, that's what mastering had to do with.
Right. And other things that we'll, I think, mention a little bit more in passing, but it used to be also thinking about track order, possibly, like in the case of an album, taking care of fade outs and that kind of thing. That might have been a lot more in the past, where we hear like ride outs on a song, where it just kind of fades away. We don't hear that so much anymore. But those were all jobs done by the mastering engineer, making sure that everything flows nicely. Yeah.
And another additional thing was the actual spacing between songs. That was another job of the mastering engineer when it came to the assembly of the album, when it was multiple songs. So there's a whole other bit of context that could go into that, but that becomes now, in today's world, a disc assembly mastering person rather than just the mastering engineer, generally speaking.
Yeah. I think you should mention the thing that you used to do on your albums there before we move on with the track spacing, because I think it's really interesting. Just can you give us just like a short,
sure.
your method? Just keep it short, but it's really cool, and it's certainly food for thought.
It is. So. Well, yeah.
Give us a quick rundown.
What I used to do is that I would take the groove of the track that was ending. And I would
the tempo,
and I'd be sitting there and I'd be snapping my fingers and feeling it out. And as the song fades away, I would give 1 to 2 measures of whatever tempo that was. And then I would figure out the exact time length that was down to like the split second, because in CD mastering, you could do that. And then I would start the downbeat of the next song on that exact downbeat of that next measure. So that as you were grooving along, in your head's bobbing from the previous song, boom, the next downbeat comes on the next song, and you're right into the next song, and it's like a seamless transition. And the interesting thing about doing that, when I added the extra time at the end of a file when I was bouncing it out for the CD assembly people, when they assembled it, is he actually noticed it.
Yeah.
And he said,
the mastering engineer.
The mastering engineer noticed it. And he said, in all of the thousands of songs and CDs that he had ever done, he had never heard anyone ever do that. And so that was like, yay, somebody noticed kind of thing.
See, that's cool.
It is.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah.
And it just keeps the flow of the disc from front to back going the entire time. And there's no dropping of the beat anywhere kind of thing.
Yeah. No, that is cool. That is really cool. So there's a little side note, but I wanted you to mention that because I thought that was kind of like a really, really cool. But in today's, when we're talking about mastering, how things have changed or at least morphed, I think.
Yes.
Is when we're in the past and in today, but in a little bit of a different circumstance, I think. But things like mastering for vinyl.
Right.
Versus mastering for CD was drastically different because you didn't have the bandwidth, so to speak, to work with vinyl, because there was a limit to how deep the grooves could get and all this kind of thing. So,
well, there still is that limit. It's not like that limit has gone away.
No, but I think it has changed slightly in that some of the vinyl coming out now is heavier and actually uses more material. So I think that now somebody please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think that is to combat that to a certain degree, because I think as there's more vinyl, it can potentially make deeper grooves and things, and therefore, more low end. But that's something that, we have talked about in the past as well, where you've talked about mastering for different streaming platforms.
Oh yeah,
and that kind of thing. Yeah, for
sure.
So,
well, and that the reason why I would go that far is because 2 dB of difference is pretty substantial. A lot of people might think it's not, but it actually is. And as we go a little further into this podcast, we'll explain that you can get a pretty big difference even in 1 dB. So that's the reason why I like to do mastering concepts for specific platforms, because every master is going to have its key component that it works for. Now, there are other mastering guys that feel like they can do one master to rule them all, like the Lord of the Rings, the main ring kind of thing, and that their one master will work across all formats, and more power to them. I think that's fantastic if you can make that work. I just don't feel like I have that kind of savvy. I can't do it. I have to go per platform, and that's just me. But I also think about, what is the platform? What is its limitations? And how do I approach getting to those limitations in the process of getting the master done? Yeah. So that's my reasoning behind that.
Yeah. There's something that you mentioned in last week's episode when we talked about work ethic and this type of thing. We were discussing burnout, but where you tend to essentially go above and beyond when you're working with a project. So I think this sort of speaks to sort of like your mindset where you think that if it's going to end up on platform X, Y, or Z, there might be different parameters that I'm dealing with. So it's something that everyone will choose if they deem that that's important. But I know that that's something that you're a big proponent of, and you could argue and do the old saying like, well, the music is that important, then pay attention to it and bring it to its fullest, right?
Yeah, I don't want to take away from guys that are, cutting one master to rule them all, so to speak, because those guys, that's all they do is mastering. So they might know something that, I don't, because I'm not just a mastering guy.
Yeah. So. No, I'm sure. And, again, it's their arena, right? They have the tools, they have the rooms, more than likely, they have the ears, and they have the experience, right? So I'm sure the guys that do that know exactly what they're doing, but it's something to consider if you're going to go for different platforms.
Exactly. So with that, why don't we take a quick break for a word from our sponsors? And we're back. What are we talking about now? We're talking about processing on the master bus, aren't we?
Yeah, because now we're kind of getting into the meat here a little bit more of this topic, where we have now hopefully a historical perspective of what mastering used to be. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people today that grown up with DAWs and things to think, okay, well, we alluded to that. Mastering is just making shit loud, right? I'm going to put my L2 on the master bus, and I'm going to crank the snot out of it. Right?
And I'm going to push it all the way to minus 0.01. And it's going to rock.
If you're lucky, if you can go louder, just go louder, and then you wonder why it sounds like Death Magnetic. I'm sorry, was that out loud? No, but in all seriousness, both you and I are big proponents of separating the stages of what you're doing as well, right? You're mixing, and then mastering is a separate stage. I think the processing on your 2-bus during the mixing stage can have some compression on there, but it's important to not think of that as your final output. It's like this is going to be the level that it's going to be at. I have to maximize this, and then I'm going to master it, and it's going to get even louder. Well, it doesn't quite work that way, right? So I tend to use some compression on my 2-bus, but I know you use a little bit less, but you're also using it in stages. So when it comes to what's your thought? Actually, I've been babbling on here. What's your thought on the separation of the mixing glue, if you will, as opposed to mastering?
Well, mixing glue is an interesting concept, because while I don't tend to put something on the 2-bus, it has more to do with my templates than anything else.
Yeah, because you do use compression, don't you? But in different buses.
I do it in different buses, and I do it in a different way than just putting it on the 2-bus. And in a sense, I don't even add them until after the mix is technically done. And it becomes like this minor little thing that I add at the end, and the type of compression that I tend to add doesn't do a whole lot to the front end, and it's literally just kind of to shave little teeny bits of the sound and to bring up the spatial relationship. So it's harder to see, because it's because I have 3 2-buses as my combined mix to the 2-bus. It's a little different. But that's not to say that I don't use a little compression on each of those final buses that go to the final 2-bus. I just don't do anything on the 2-bus at the end. And I feel like I do so much work to the mix that I don't really technically need it on the 2-bus at the end. Mm-hmm. And I just want the mastering stage to do its job the way it does its job. depending on who I'm hiring for doing that mastering stage. I hire somebody specifically because of the job that they can do on the material that I want them to master for, if that makes any sense. So, but that's not to say that I wouldn't put something on the 2 bus in terms of maybe a little bit of EQ or a little bit of compression, but it also depends on, do I feel like it needs it? And often by the time it reaches my 2 bus, I don't feel like it needs it. So.
Yeah. Well, you said a keyword in there that you said was a little bit or slight.
It's very slight.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that I think is important. It's an important word to keep in mind, because any processing that you're doing on your 2 bus, it should be, at least in my opinion, and I think yours as well, it should be just minor corrections or sweetening things that you have there. If you find yourself having to be too heavy-handed on your 2 bus, well, then your mix is wrong. You're probably better off going back and revisiting your mixing than the processing on the 2 bus, because that kind of shines a light that there are other issues with your mix.
Yes.
So if you find that, I have to boost like 10 dB at 100, well, then there's probably
you're missing something somewhere.
In your mix.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you sure you didn't mute the bass? So there are small things that are there, but I think it's important to think the same idea with EQ and compression on your 2 bus. I'm thinking I like to use like a Focusrite style compressor on my 2 bus, either that or an SSL thing. But I tend to use, we're tickling it here. It's like 1 to maybe 3 dB at the most in cases, right? If there are things that are happening there. So it's not like we're squashing things right there. And I'm certainly not thinking of sort of maximizing volume or anything like that at that stage.
Far from it. I let the mastering stage define the volume, because as we have mentioned in other episodes, if you mix too loud and you want to get a mix done for, say, Apple Music, which is one of the quieter services at minus 16 LUFS. If your mix goes to the mastering guy at minus 12, you're 4 dB louder than Apple's going to want it, so to speak.
Yeah.
You're not going to get the what do they call it? The made for I or made for Apple mix.
It used to be like the made for iTunes or mastered for iTunes.
Yeah, now it's mastered for Apple Music kind of thing, of which I have that designation. I can master for Apple Music, which is a fun designation to have. But you have to be very careful, because you have to know all the steps that went in prior to the mastering stage for that, and make sure that you're mastering appropriately, where there's no clipping and there's no certain things happening, and you deliver it at a level that they want, and it's not like you're gain reductioning it that many dB kind of thing.
Yeah.
And if they discover that you've done it, apparently they can yank your status of being able to master for Apple Music.
Oh.
Yeah, so
we don't want that.
Well, I certainly don't.
Right. No, of course. But so again, the difference here, I think, when you are
I think
talking
to kind of go along with your thing here, you're talking about using certain kinds of compressors, so like the Focusrite, as you mentioned, and an SSL, and I'm going to guess the SSL G bus is what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm a Slate guy, so it's basically the emulation of that.
So when I'm going to kind of put words in your mouth, Chris, and say that when you're saying that you're tickling it from about 1 to 3 dB, my tickling would probably be on the lower end of like the 1 dB thing. You might want to clarify how far you go, but what you're really trying to say is that you're not throwing a limiter on there and then like literally cranking the shit out of it and lopping all the tops off is what you're meaning.
No,
so you're literally saying it's just a little bit of compression and not limiting to control some sort of sound kind of thing.
When I'm doing this, it has essentially nothing to do with trying to make it loud. It's just trying to make it a little bit more cohesive, where essentially just bringing down those peaks, right? That can poke out. And it's strictly for the sound of it. Now, the benefit could be that it actually brings up the lower end of the track, right? So it could make it sound a little bit fuller.
Another benefit.
That's
benefit, as you're trying to talk about benefits here, is that if you've got spatial relationships going on with the reverbs and delays that you've added into the mix to create space, that little bit of compression glue, or whatever you want to call it on your 2-bus, which is not the same thing as the mastering thing, can bring up that spatialness to actually give the space a better feel. That would be another reason that I might put a compressor on the 2-bus, is to do that. Yeah. And another reason might also be to tighten up the groove a little bit of something, just a hair, to kind of bring a little more definition to something that's happening.
Yeah, it's an interesting process that we've talked about this sort of off camera here as well, but how very small changes or very small values can have a large impact once we sort of know what to listen for.
Yes.
Right? If somebody goes, oh, okay, well, listen to what happens to the kick. You can kind of focus in on that. Or like you mentioned, the spatial awareness, right? If anybody's ever, I'm sure everybody has, but if you have like a vocal bus and you're sending your vocal reverb to that same bus, and then you might apply some compression to that, notice how much bigger or how much more prominent that reverb can become.
Sure.
Right? So it's listening to those, and then you got to think about what all that is doing on your 2-bus, like it's coming out. So it does affect all of those things. But so I don't. That's the cosmetics, right?
Yes.
That I consider on the 2-bus. Small changes. I'm not thinking of anything for, like, this is gonna, I'll just, again, that it's a joke at this point, right? For us at least. But
to put lipstick on a pig? No, just kidding.
No, well, yeah. In this case, like a limiter on your master or your master out, right? So it's like, just crank that bad boy because
louder's always better, right?
Obviously, yeah. But you have to give when you're handing off your tracks to be mastered, or indeed if you're doing it yourself, right? Which I don't.
We don't recommend that.
Yeah, it's good to have a separate set of ears. You want to give that person something to work with, right? Some dynamic range or anything. You want to have them, sounding as ready as possible, where he or she can just put the final little touches in the mastering. But if you've already, limited the crap out of it, there's no dynamic range. What are they going to do with that? So the processing that goes on there should be, you should try to get your mix to sound as good as possible that you can do before you hand it off. And we did an episode on this, actually. So go back to listen to that, preparing your tracks for mastering, I think what we called it. But that's, there's some helpful hints in there as well. So I think...
You've reached the end?
No, but I think it's I think to sort of answer Justin's question here is, try to think of them as two separate things.
Yes.
Like think of the first thing, getting your mix to sound as good as you can, and keep your eye on levels and don't let them run rampant. Give the mastering engineer something to work with. And also, I would say the tools that the mastering person is going to use are generally, dedicated for the task of mastering.
Yes.
Right? It's not
the same as buying some kind of plug-in preset thing that does the same thing to every genre, or has maybe multiple presets per genre, but is like, just run this preset and it's going to sound just like this.
Yeah, and it's a widener, and it's going to have a certain slope of EQ, and it's going to be a limiter on top of that, right? We all know we talk all the time about content dependency, right?
Yes.
How So there is no one EQ curve or one compression setting that's going to work for everything. But that's why you hire a mastering engineer guy, because they
know what they're doing.
Be needed for their right.
Hopefully, they know what they're doing.
Right. Yeah. And if not, I'll let that be on set. But
just to kind of cap it off with what you're saying is when you're going to give your track to the mastering engineer, give them a little bit of dynamic range if it's supposed to be in there, and don't slam your mix. Don't make it so loud that it can't be handled, so to speak.
Yeah. And another thing, just to again wrap this up on the EQ end of it, if you are not completely happy with the sound of your mix from some sort of like frequency standpoint, tweak your mix. Don't hand it off to the mastering person and think, well, they're going to fix that. No. That's your job, right?
Well, it's that old adage, right? That usually when you're tracking, you say, oh, we'll just fix it in the mix. And then when you've got the mix done, oh, we'll just fix it in the mastering. Nope. Fix it at the front. Yeah. Always fix it up front.
Right. So there are dedicated tools for mastering it. And I would say that, I'm painting with very broad strokes here, but I would say that they're designed for the task. And it's not that they can't do minor adjustments, because the people that do this, they can certainly do that. But I would say, the gear is designed for that, and it has more of a gentle touch, I think, as a broad stroke. I know I'm not speaking for all gear here, but if you consider that, it might get you in the headspace a little bit more of what it is that needs to be done at the mastering stage, if anything. I mean, a perfect thing would be like, your mix sounds great. Let's bring it up to level, and then you're done,
That would be, that's the ideal thing, right? Because then the mastering engineer is like thinking, well, I've accomplished something good, and the mix engineer has accomplished something great. So, I guess hand in hand, they'd both be great. But would it be fair to say that for today, for this upcoming Tuesday tip, that you can show people how to work with a little bit of compression tickling on the tube bus?
I think that sounds like a great idea.
Fantastic.
I can definitely do that. Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah. So are we ready? A short episode, but I think we're kind of good for that. Is there anything that you would like to add to that, Jody?
No, not really. I think we've kind of covered the things that we meant to cover over the differences between mastering and the tube bus processing. So why don't we move on to Friday Finds? What have you got today, Chris?
I discovered some new music this past week, at least new music to me. And it is I think it's a duo, but it's a project. They're called League of Lights. And I came across my Spotify thing. Hey, you might like this. So I checked it out. Their album is called Dreamers Don't Come Down. And I couldn't believe I hadn't heard that before, because usually when I discover new music, it's they've been around for 15 years. Like, okay, great, just great pop songwriting. The production I thought was incredible, and it's a good song. So this band League of Lights, or a duo called League of Lights, it just floored me. So I'm like, cool. People need to know about these guys. What about you? What do you got?
I'm going to go with Ableton Live's 11. And I'm not exactly sure how recently it came out. However, Ableton Live does some really cool things with audio. It's very soupy, and you can do some pretty wild things. In addition to that, one of the reasons why I am even thinking about Ableton Live 11 right now is because someone has gone through the painstaking reality of installing all 11 versions of Ableton Live. And made a video of opening each one to show the progression of Ableton from its inklings beginnings at version 1 to what it's now become in its very completed version 11. And I think the video is roughly about a half hour long, and you get to see how it progressed over time.
That's really interesting.
Yes, and part of it also just kind of makes me think that Donnie and I had a little bit of hand right around version 4 in some of the changes that happened that aren't visual, but more internal. And with that, why don't we say we're ready to wrap it all up and saying that while we still have your attention and you are enjoying the podcast, we would appreciate it if you would go to insidetherecordingstudio.com/review, or you can just go to insidetherecordingstudio.com and click on the review link. There are a couple of different pages where you can go and leave us a review and tell everybody that, hey, I love listening to you guys. You should listen to them too, kind of things. And it would make us happy, it'd make you happy, and make other people happy all at the same time. In addition to that, you can sign up on the email list and or go check the giveaway page, because right now we have a giveaway going on. And you might win something cool. And who doesn't love winning cool shit? In addition to that, send us an email at goldstar, GOLDSTAR, at insidetherecordingstudio.com, and you will get something cool back in your inbox in the not so distant future after it hits ours. And if you have a topic of suggestion that you would like Chris and I to talk about, much like today's episode, coming to you for a young man named Justin, you can contact us on our contact page and send us that suggestion, and we'll put it into rotation just for you and for everybody else. And with that, let's wrap the bow on it and say sayonara until next week.
See you later, Jody. Have a good one, buddy.